Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Let's Talk Assassin's Creed, your one podcast for all things Assassin's Creed.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Assassin's Creed. Normally at this point I would tell you the episode number, but this week I can't do that because we don't exactly know yet when this episode will be released. We're recording on the 8th of March, and this episode will probably be published around the middle of March, but we'll keep you updated on Twitter, of course. Usually I would also introduce the topic and the guest for this episode, but I'm not going to do that this time, and here's why. If you've been listening for a while, you will know that I'm very much the new boy here. It was just 3 years ago last week when I first played an Assassin's Creed game, when I started Odyssey and completed the Battle of Thermopylae as Leonidas. However, Declan, our dear lead host, is very much the OG fan. He's been playing these games since 2007 with Assassin's Creed 1. So it's only right that, Declan, you have the honour of introducing this week's special guest.
Every time you say 2007, I realise 15 years playing a franchise makes me sound old.
You are getting old, absolutely.
But yes, I have the great pleasure of bringing somebody on board who I've always wanted to bring on board, Darby McDevitt. Welcome.
Hello. You think you're old.
Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks. Good to be here.
So we thought we'd start the show. We have some more kind of serious, franchise and story questions, but we thought we'd start with a bit of fun. We thought we'd start with a little bit of, shall we say, speed dating or icebreaker questions. So very fast, very short. Let's see if we can do, I don't know, what do you reckon, Declan? 15 questions in a minute or 2 minutes? Let's see how we do.
15 in a minute is possible.
All right. Do you want to get us started, Declan?
Okay, first question. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
What was the last book you read, or what book are you currently reading?
That would probably break my NDA, actually.
Ooh, you have to tell us. I mean, it's the rules of the podcast. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no. What did I... Goodness.
Damn it. I wish I'd saved this question up for later anyway.
No, because everything I've been reading literally for probably a year is for future projects.
Right.
So I can't.
All right.
So if I can go all the way back, it probably either a Cormac McCarthy novel. Like I love Cormac McCarthy, but I've already read all his big ones like Blood Meridian and the Border trilogy. So I'm like sweeping up all the other ones, so maybe like Outer Dark or Suttree, probably Suttree. Good old, American Gothic kind of stuff.
Okay. Declan is very much the reader of the two of us, so some good stuff for your list there, Declan.
Once I finish my Stephen King collection, I might look into it.
Yeah,
right.
Do read Blood Meridian. I mean, you've seen No Country for Old Men and The Road, probably. He wrote both those, but Blood Meridian is the book to attempt.
I may look into this for sure. So, what's your favorite ice cream flavor?
I just like plain vanilla. It's always been the best.
Classic. What was the last TV show that you binge watched?
Actually, Succession. Just finished it 2 nights ago with good old Brian Cox and his family.
Yep.
What's your most prized possession and why?
I have a GNL Stratocaster that I bought when I learned to play guitar almost 30 years ago. It's a really heavy Strat, and I love it, and I played a lot of shows with it, and I composed a lot of music on it. It doesn't get enough love anymore, but it's because I'm a musician in my spare time, so that's something that's been with me for a long time.
Very good. We may come to that very, very shortly. Are there any pets in the McDevitt family household?
No, I've always been a dog person, but since I left my parents' house in Spokane, Washington, I have never owned a dog, but I've always wanted to. So if I ever get a yard at some point, because I live in Little Italy in Montreal, so there's no yards. There's only, porches and decks.
Gotcha.
But I'd love a dog.
Good choice.
Dogs are cute. We babysit dogs.
German shepherds. I had a lot of German shepherds in my family.
Ah, big dogs. My
Yeah.
dog is so small he would be about the size of the tail
Yeah.
of a German shepherd. So yes.
Favorite musician / band?
A lot. Prince is a huge one because he's the first. Purple Rain is the first album I listened to when I was about 9, and I thought, oh, this is art. This is something special. So Prince is huge for me. Another one is Talk Talk, especially Mark Hollis as a musician and composer, and Talk Talk's later albums like Spirit of Eden and Laughing Stock and Mark Hollis's solo record are super important to me, as they're just so inspiring as like, I guess the genre is post-rock, but they're just like the most inventive albums I've ever heard. So I say Prince and Talk Talk.
All right, got some listening for Spotify when we finish recording today. That's cool. What was your first paying job?
I think my dad knew a guy who worked at a Mercedes dealer in downtown Spokane, and they needed a night janitor. So I think 16 years old, I was a janitor at a Mercedes dealer. And the only fun part of the job was that I'd have to come in on Saturdays and drive all the cars that were in the shop and drive them off the lot, park them elsewhere so I could scrub the whole floor and then bring them back. So I got to drive a bunch of Mercedes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Deathly afraid of doing it, damaging them, but
oh yeah.
Yeah. So janitor at a Mercedes dealer.
Very good.
So I think we've just gone over the minute. So
that's okay.
We can ask one more and then go into some nice juicy questions.
Let's do it.
So I think I'm going to pick random one from this list. What is a skill that you would like to learn?
I should say learning to speak French better, because I've been in Montreal 10 years and my French is pretty appalling. But what's another that wouldn't embarrass me?
We'll edit that bit out. Don't worry. No one will hear this.
Nah, leave it in. I'd actually like to be a much better piano player. Since I love music so much, I took music lessons when I was a kid, but then I quit because I wasn't sure what they were for. But then when I fell in love with music, like listening to Beatles records and such, then I was like, oh yes, this is great. But I played guitar, and so by the time I started noodling on pianos, I'd lost the ability to like have any kind of dexterity in my fingers. So I'm not a good piano player at all, but I would love to be much better.
Very good. Do you play any instruments, Declan? I can be completely honest. I don't even play the gramophone. So, yeah.
I tried.
Does anyone anymore?
Got some wax cylinders somewhere. I'm sure I can bust out. Yeah. Declan, what about you?
I tried guitar, then I realised that the guitar that my father gave me was like broken, so I couldn't play it. So I tried piano and realised I just like the noises the black keys make. So that's the limit of my musical talent.
Well, you can play blues with those keys. That's a pentatonic scale. So
there you go. That's what you can do the intro for us in the future, Declan.
Yeah.
I'd have to convince my girlfriend to let me drag a piano into the house, but we've got a small house. I'm not sure a piano could fit.
Yeah, that could be tricky. Yeah, maybe a baby grand instead of a grand, you know.
I could try this.
So should we? That concludes the speed dating section, should we say? Thanks very much, Darby. That was a bit of fun. I wonder if we might start with some of the more Assassin's Creed specific questions. So I'll get us started. You returned to Ubisoft last October after some time away.
Yep.
And while you were away, Ubisoft published a press release telling us that there'd been kind of a reorganization of the studios and the sort of future development, should we say, of the Assassin's Creed franchise. And what I was wondering was, how was your first day back? Was it a case of, welcome back, Mr. McDevitt, we've kept your desk here for you, or with the reorganization, did it feel like you were joining a brand new team? And what will fans get from this reorganization? What does it mean for future content?
I mean, the first day back was great, and everyone, I walked back into a team that I knew almost everybody, and even some people from maybe other projects come to join the family, the Assassin's Creed family. So people even that I knew from other teams as well. But it's been great, and it's just the time away was actually in some ways for me to sort of assess what I wanted to do, and I used the time away wisely to work on some of my own things. But I mean, I'm just walking into back into an organization and a team that really has a clear idea of what they want to do, and has a lot of exciting things they want to do, and a lot of things that I've been excited about for many, many years. So I'm actually more excited now than I've been in a long time. So I kind of have to leave it at that.
That is great. That alone, I know you can't say too much, and I just want to say to people listening, look, Darby's a professional. I'm sure he's got a watertight NDA, and he's not going to ruin, the work that many hundreds or thousands of people are working on. So we are not going to be asking and wasting time on questions like, tell us what the next game is. That's silly. But we do appreciate that, you're trying to tell us as much as you can without spoiling anything. So appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I stopped there.
Understood. Over to you, Declan.
So this wasn't technically on the list, but I am actually quite curious about it now it's in my head. You helped write Valhalla, and Valhalla is amazing. But one of the questions I really want to ask is, how much do you love mythology and weaving it into the Assassin's Creed universe? Because I can't get enough of it.
Do you know what, mate? I knew you were going to throw a mythology question in there. That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
That's a big question. I could talk a long time about it. I think there's a couple different pathways I could go with this. One is that my personal the thing that I personally love the most about Assassin's Creed is history, and the idea of hidden history, and the Assassin Templar conflict. And it's been, if you look back at the games that I've worked on personally, really the only one I got to work on where it was just history and Assassins versus Templars is Revelations, if you count the AAA games. Since then, it's been either a pirate or kind of a proto-assassin. I worked on Origins for a long time, and Valhalla, it's Vikings. So it's actually been a long time since I just really got into the meat of that, Assassin Templar conflict, plus history. Each game is like layered on new things. And when we kind of went into with Origins, it's impossible to talk about ancient Egypt without thinking about their mythology. And same goes with ancient Greece. I didn't work on Odyssey. And same goes with the Viking age and that ethos. Norse mythology is incredibly important. So I think with the previous three games, it was just that the teams, while working on history, realized that a huge part of their history is also the mythology. And you could have done it in a way where you just showed the mythology as a part of daily life. But I think all the creative teams were said, like, well, let's bring that mythology to life a little bit. And I know that fans have varying degrees of, satisfaction with how we handled that in each game. But it was always going to be something you had to address, right? You can't do Vikings without at least talking and immersing yourself, if not in the actual mythology, the religious practice, right? And same goes for Origins. You want, I guess the way I'd say it is, in some sense, you want to, if you're living in somebody's memories, you want to also access some kind of subjective experience of what it was like to be that person. So with Bayek, what is it like to actually believe in Egyptian gods? And there's a couple of different ways I guess you could do that. Same went for Eivor and Valhalla. What is it like to walk around believing that these gods have influence on your life? And so in some sense, it's important to make the player feel that. It could have been just them rubbing hammers of Thor and saying, Thor, protect me. Or you can literally like, play through a sequence where you are, running alongside Thor. These are the creative questions we ask ourselves whenever we start a new project, and we think, okay, how best to do that? But I think that the approach will always come from the specific history, the specific period of history that you're tackling. So if we were to this is something I always use for jokes. I've said this many times, but if I were to do a period of history that I really like, which is like the birth of hip hop in New York in the 1970s, right? Awesome time period. I don't think we'd be having a lot of, fantasy mythology in that time period, because that's not really what's evocative of that time period. It would be something completely different. You'd have to have some sort of Assassin Templar conflict and that matched the vibe of the era, if that makes sense.
It does. Although, do you know what? As soon as you said 70s hip hop, it just, and I know it's totally different. Well, not totally. It's a different time period and different genre. But I'm immediately reminded of all those people that are still desperate for Jazz Age Junkies that we saw in the the Unity loading screen. One day we want Jazz Age Junkies as a playable sequence.
Yes, yeah, that's my fault too. I wrote that whole. I designed that whole page in Unity. So.
Fantastic.
I don't know. In the long run, did I cause more heartache than amusement, because so many people want each of those to be real games? But actually, some of them are, right. Some of them are like
absolutely
the Haytham and Edward ones, or the I can't remember which ones.
Was it the Lone Eagle, Devils of the Caribbean?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I forget what the Ezio ones were called.
So Hell in Hibernia because that's actually probably a game I would not do now that I think about it, because it's too close, right? Like, I studied a lot of Irish literature and history in university, and I went to school in Ireland, a master's degree in Ireland, and I think coming out of that I was like, oh, that'd be a great time period. But actually I think it's so close, and some of the wounds are so raw still. I don't think it would be a benefit anyone to like say, oh, this historical person was a Templar and this person was an assassin. You'd ruffle feathers. You'd ruffle a lot of feathers if you made some hard and fast decisions about that. So I think
under that title, were you thinking of the Irish War of Independence in the sort of 1916 and so on?
I think the idea was all of it. It would have been the War for Independence and the actual ensuing Civil War.
Gotcha.
In 23. But I can't be
Irish
like
politics. It's divided along those lines somewhat, isn't it? So
exactly.
Tricky.
So you working on these games for a long time, you really actually see how small little fun fictional decisions you make. You're actually making a statement in some way about history, and you're saying, hey, we have a stance on this, and so I think it's actually best to. The further you go back, the more the less contentious it is. So there's a guy, Dan Carlin, who has a podcast.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So he has a great podcast on called Wrath of the Khans, which is about Genghis Khan, and he said talking about Genghis Khan is a bit like that. Like, Genghis Khan was like killed millions and millions of people. But you can kind of now, with many hundreds of years since that time, you can say, oh, like, what were the, not say positive and negative effects of Genghis Khan's rampage through Asia and parts of Europe, but how did he affect history, going forward?
Yeah.
And you'd be like, what? That sounds crazy. But, 500 years from now, you just sort of like, okay, here are the things that were set in motion, as it were.
It feels like then that Lydia Fry's sequence in World War One. We've got the Chronicles game set, I think, in 1918 in Russia. That's perhaps as far forward as you'd want to go, while still retaining enough historical distance, shall we say?
Yeah, this is just my opinion, by the way. Like, I don't like. It's actually just sort of private thoughts that I've had. Like, maybe I'm sure there's somebody else who would feel comfortable and have like an interesting way of doing a game set, maybe set in World War II or something. doing it in a way that I haven't thought about yet. But it is just something that I think about as a writer. So yeah. But then I tend to not want black and white, stories anyway. So, maybe that's the issue. Like if you're somebody who sees the assassins as unabashedly good, good guys and the Templars as evil, then assigning Templar and assassin roles to real historical figures becomes problematic because there's not too many purely good and purely evil people in history. I mean, I can think of a few, but
the shades of grey are just more interesting.
Yeah.
All right, shall I? I'll move on to our next question. And again, this may be one that you can't answer, or perhaps would prefer not to, but I think it's important to ask it anyway. Do writers on the Assassin's Creed team now have the freedom to create the protagonist they would like of any gender, race, color, etc.?
Do we now have that? No, because I mean, I think that's framing the question that way is actually misleading. There's no one person, and there's not even a group. There's the creation of all these things is a team effort, and so many things go into the creation of a character and a time period. It's never, and you might even say, oh, there's the creative director, but it's never even the creative director's decision to do these things. Typically, Ubisoft operates with a large number of people who get together and all kind of say, here's the kinds of things we'd like to do, and it becomes a kind of a collaboration. And so no one person is calling the shots. So the results of that collaboration, I think, I'd like to say, yeah, there's a lot more opportunity for the results of that collaboration to be more diverse, but it still has to come about through collaboration with the team, because we try not to have any auteurs on the team. We really try to be collaborative in the way we do things. So you're always going to I'm the quote unquote lead writer or narrative director of a number of games in this series, but I've very rarely been the guy that just unilaterally decides a thing. On the level of dialogue, yeah, like I've written some cool lines of dialogue, but once you get above the lines of dialogue, I'm not the one who's deciding, oh, this next game is about Edward Kenway, or he's a pirate. Like that comes about through a long series of discussions and spitballing sessions about what kind of game we want to make. So that was a rambling answer, but I don't know if it answered your question.
It's also it's a very interesting answer, and just a very quick follow-up. So let's take Edward Kenway as an example. How long is the process from sort of blank whiteboard to final kind of character portrait or pen portrait that you say, okay, this is the guy we are writing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I can tell you how Edward Kenway came about, right? So I'm sitting here finishing up Revelations. Corey May is deep in Assassin's Creed 3. So I finish up Revelations. I'm Assassin's Creed 3 is a year out or so, and some of the team comes to me, some producers come to me and say like, hey, Darby, would you be interested in writing some DLCs for Assassin's Creed 3 after it comes out? We're thinking, because we're going to have this awesome ship technology in AC3, that it would be cool to do a pirate game. And it just so happens that if we roll back the clock a bit, there's this character, Connor, then there's this character, Hatham, and then the grandfather character, he would fit squarely in the golden age of piracy. And it just so happens that Corey has named him Edward Kenway in a database entry. That's all we know about him.
Interesting.
Okay. And so would you like to do some DLC? So the first plan was sitting down, I think it was probably October, November of 2011, with a couple people on the creative team saying like, okay, what if we did DLCs for AC3, and they were pirate themed. What would they look like? And we came up with this series of like 6 small sequences where you watch this character Edward Kenway grow up from age like 15 with Avery, and I think what would that be, 16, like 98 or something like that. And he grows up, and he becomes a pirate, and you see him go from age 15 to like 30 into the golden age of piracy with Blackbeard and Horn of Gold and all that. Okay, that sounds great. So for 1 or 2 months, where we think, okay, it's going to be DLCs, da 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 da. I think I've told this story elsewhere, but it actually turned out because Alex Amancio was the creative director of Revelations. He, unbeknownst to us, he was actually making a plan to leave Ubisoft. But right before he did, he put together this presentation with some other people, and he pitched to editorial in Paris, and he said, this shouldn't be DLCs. This should be a full game. Who doesn't want to play pirates? Like, it should be a full game. So we get back from Christmas, and Amancio, I believe he came to me and he said, I got the green light to make it a whole game. Oh my God, awesome. Also, I'm leaving Ubisoft.
Oh my word.
Oh,
so
okay.
Congrats. Now you've got a lot more work to do. And yes, you'll be on your own.
Yeah. And the, yeah. And so we said, oh, well, thank you. That's a good parting gift. So he left, another team was assembled to pick up, because a lot of people left. I think that happens. And so that's how it came about. So, okay, now you're in January of 2012, I guess, or so, and you're thinking, okay, rethink this. If it's a full game, do we want to do what we just talked about for the DLC? And I'm actually not a fan of spanning too many years. Like, I thought the Ezio, AC2, it spans like 28 years. But, the only aging Ezio does is he grows a goatee. So I thought, I'm not into that. So we picked the kind of like the coolest 7 or 8 years in the golden age of piracy. And we just made a story that kind of fit that. Is that right? It's about 7 or 8 years, I think.
If
maybe it's a little less.
Our friend of the show, White Wolf Whispers on, she would tell us straight away, because she's the Black Flag expert. But I've just finished replaying and 100%ing Black Flag, and damn, that's a good game.
Maybe it's even 5 years. Anyway, so point being, so it came from 2 disparate things. Like, hey, we've got this ship technology. Let's kind of further iterate on that. Plus, here's this random character, a no-name character, Edward, who just happens to be, he's just kind of a name in a database. Haytham's father, there's a line about him taking Haytham to the opera. That's about it, right? And in fact, he has different color hair in the Assassin's Creed 3 book, right? Which is like a line that I don't think anyone read on the AC4 team. So when it came to time to making him, they made him light brown hair, right? So these details just get missed, right? They get missed because you're thinking about so many other things that I always think we should have a resident. We should have a couple fans on the payroll just to like read through our stuff and be like, on page 16 of this novelization, you mentioned this. I'm like, oh, okay. Do we retcon it or not?
People are going to be tweeting you as soon as this episode goes out, offering their services. Like it's isn't it George R.R. Martin that has a couple of sort of super fans that maybe cross-check his chapters to make sure that they are consistent.
It's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind being on the payroll. I run a podcast. I do a lot of digging.
But then you lose your editorial independence. So
that's the thing. And then Declan, you would have to sign an NDA, and I would have to do this on my own, and it would be terrible. So yeah.
I highly value, this is me speaking personally, but I highly value the editorial independence of a lot of our fans, because I think that's if you're a true artist or of any kind, you want brutal and honest feedback to help you make better, to help you be better, make better work. So I podcasts like this are important. Guys like Access the Animus are important, or I should say organizations like Access the Animus are important, because they are best kind of fans, right? The hold our feet to the fire, but also
Mm.
celebrate the work when it's good, and scratch their heads when it's questionable. I
Indeed.
guess.
Indeed.
Yeah.
The only problem I have with that is I will always be honest about anything Assassin's Creed, but as soon as it comes to mythology, I'm a little bit too biased. I spent all last year reading Neil Gaiman's mythology, Norse mythology,
Yeah.
just to play the Asgard and Jotunheim arcs, just because I wanted to see how close it was, and it was brilliant.
Yeah.
And knowing that myth as you play Asgard was a little bit sweeter because you knew what was coming.
That's the first book I read on the mythology.
So the question I have is also from White Wolf Whispers. She reached out to me, and it's a good question because Black Flag is one of the most innovative games of the franchise, because Edward is a grey area. He's not an assassin, he's not a Templar. His actions at the start are a bit Templary, but then he becomes a bit more assassin-y. Sorry. So she would like to know, at what point in Black Flag does Edward actually become an assassin? Is it after he escapes the prison and he gets his robes handed to him? Is it sometime after the rock bottom scene? Or is it by the time he actually reaches Atabai and he tells him what nothing is true and everything is permitted means? So where would we say that Edward becomes the assassin?
Well, I don't know. I think that's a good question. I think this, you could ask the same of like anyone who converts to a new religion, right? Like there are ceremonial thresholds or that you can pass, but maybe there is also like what steps do you take in your thinking to slowly come over to that? I don't know that there's a hard and fast place where he becomes an assassin in his mind. I think he gradually grows into it, but I presume actually he officially becomes an assassin when he goes back to London and probably does take some ceremony, just like Ezio does at the top of the tower in AC2, or the ceremony that he officiates with his sister, right? And those are the thresholds. Or it's kind of like when you say, like, when did I fall in love with my wife? Well, that was gradually, right? But then there was a time where I got married and I put on the ring. I think being an assassin is a philosophical mindset, and there is an official moment, but I think really that was the whole point of the story in Assassin's Creed 4, is to say, what is the process of somebody gradually coming to believe in these things? Because I was seeing a kind of a sad trend where people were calling assassins, we're thinking of assassins as a bloodline. I wanted to be very clear that the important part of being an assassin, is that you adopt these ideas of your own free will. If you were to actually say that, being an assassin is a bloodline, well, that's actually a Templar way of looking at the world. Like, there are people who are essentially better than other people. And so I was really trying to make that clear in the story. And since that wasn't clear enough, I put those Desmond logs in Valhalla to make it even clearer.
As a follow-up to that, would that mean then, hypothetically, and it's something I've thought of a lot since Black Flag and Assassin's Creed 3, because I still argue that technically Connor never got a proper ceremony, so he's not a assassin in ceremony, but he's an assassin philosophically, because he does join the with Achilles, but his mindset is in the same flow.
Yeah.
Is it then possible that even if a story like Eivor, she does, in my opinion, when you play the story, follow in the lines of an assassin? She doesn't go out and hurt innocent. She does kind of seek that freedom. She even battles against her own order, which is destiny. She is then philosophically an assassin. You don't just need that big title. Would that be right in saying?
Perhaps. I think there's two ways of thinking about it. One would be that, there's a kind of a saying, like, when people split hairs against the definition of, like, oh, but, so and so. Well, actually, there's the whole no true Scotsman philosophical argument, right? Have you heard that before?
No, go
I
ahead.
have, yes.
Yes. So tell me if I'm right. But it's basically like there's a guy in let's say in Inverness sitting around reading a paper, and he sees that someone in the paper has been accused of a heinous crime, and the guy's got the last name like McLeod or something like that, and the guy reading the paper says, "Oh well," or no, sorry, he doesn't see his last name yet, and he says, "Oh well, no Scotsman would ever commit a crime that heinous." But then he reads down lower and it says, "Oh, the guy's name is McLeod." He says, "Well, no true Scotsman would do that." And like, it's one of the things about video games and fantasy worlds in general. We tend to be really, really monolithic about things. Like, an assassin is an assassin. But I think in all games that I've tried to write and all, the ways that I've tried to tell these stories, I think an assassin is just somebody who says they're an assassin and tries in some way to push forward the creed in the way that they understand it. Now, what that means is most assassins are going to look fairly similar, but you see even in like a game like Unity that there's assassins who have slightly different interpretations of what it means to be an assassin and what the goals of an assassin should be. And I think if you were to really honestly talk about assassins and Templars as competing philosophies, you have to also admit that there is no one way to be an assassin and there's no one way to be a Templar, and that over time these ideas will morph and change a little bit, and they'll probably keep some features, but as you see, like, with the history of religions, right, these things morph and change too. In the history of philosophies change, and you can never pin these things down very well. And so really an assassin is somebody who says they're an assassin, and so in that sense Eivor is not an assassin because she says she's not. She might actually have a lot of similar viewpoints, but she is not somebody who has said, "Oh, I want to fight for the liberty of all mankind, and fight to lift shackles off people." She's somebody who says, "I want to fight for my people and the culture that I understand," and I admire Hytham for that, for what he's doing, but I don't think she sort of sees her remit as large as he does, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can understand it. The way you describe it actually kind of opens up my eyes to the franchise a bit more and sees how fluid this all could be for the philosophy, and it's kind of interesting to see how it could go. Is it ever possible then to mentally put, because it's something I've just been thinking about recently, but I try and stay away from the whole Bodlek Assassin vs Templars are just the people. Is it ever possible to look at some like an outside battle, for example, I'm looking now, Odin and Loki, and philosophically feel that their behaviour is mirroring what an assassin versus Templar conflict would look like? Because Odin's that very much order, no chaos, let's start everything out. Something that Templars could do in an era, it's not always the same. Whereas Loki is a bit more like, hey, let's be a bit more freedom, I want to do what I want to do. And sometimes you do have that mentality to look at. That's kind of what a philosophy of an assassin versus Templar conflict will look like. Not word for word, no, but
yeah. Well, I think if any philosophy is useful in life, it applies to a large number of situations. But the philosophy is never going to be the natural law, if that makes sense. Like even like take a Newtonian law, like force equals mass times acceleration. That's actually just our best description of what's going on. That's like a shorthand for what's going on under the hood of the universe, right? It's only a useful formula for covering a large number of cases. And I think the same way of any kind of good philosophy, like when you describe the assassin's viewpoint, you're just trying to describe a general trend in society of, I look at it as authoritarian versus libertarian, right? Not American libertarianism, but like if you look at the political compass, right versus left and authority versus liberty, I see the Assassin Templar conflict as on a spectrum of the authority versus liberty. There are people who are more authoritarian in terms of like, we need to impose strictures on people so that we can have an ordered society, versus liberty, which is we need to lift shackles off people so they can feel free to express themselves and live their life the way. If you express it in that way, you can see the positives and negatives of both, right? Order tends to mean safety and lack of surprises, but it also can mean oppression. So it can mean stability, but it can also mean oppression. And the extreme end of liberty can mean lack of oppression, freedom, but it can lead to chaos. It's not that assassins would fight for chaos, but it can be a knock-on effect of excessive liberty, right? Because if everyone's free to do what they want to do, that can be a result. So you see these two poles and you say there are these, you can see why somebody would want order and you could see why somebody would want freedom. And excesses of both can lead to positives and negative things. And so the assassin way of looking at the world is a description of a certain set of viewpoints. So when you say like, oh, Odin might represent Templars and Loki might represent assassins, I don't think that it's like black and white, like, oh yeah, that's exactly what we were thinking. But it's more that Loki represents certain types of behaviors that kind of fit on that spectrum of things, and Odin would represent things on that spectrum. But I don't know that it means that it divides so cleanly into assassin and Templar. But it certainly is like a useful description of the world sometimes. But then as I read history and as I do a lot of research for things, that's actually the thing I run into the most is like, wow, the assassin Templar conflict does not break cleanly in this period of history. Like really hard to like cleanly map how we think of the fictional assassins onto actual history. If that makes sense.
It doesn't. It just makes ultimately for more interesting storytelling.
Yes, and that's ultimately
If it was black and white, then where's the interest? Where's the debate? Where's the follow-on stories or the reinterpretation of previous stories?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the grayness that I think spurs all the ongoing discussions on Reddit and Discord and Twitter and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
it's great.
Sometimes calling it gray makes you feel like you're copping out, but it's definitely like. It's more that.
How about shades of meaning?
Well, yeah, it's just overlapping. I don't know. I'm sure some historian has really like expertly clarified this, but yeah, I mean, like, we can use shades of gray still, but it's more that the more you really get into history, the more that you dedicate yourself. And I'm sure lots of Assassin's Creed fans have had this, where let's say they play a game like Valhalla or Origins or Black Flag, and they go, oh man, I'm really interested in this era. Let me go read about it. I think you'll find that reading about it brings you even more nuance than playing the game, right? The games, we have to make decisions. We have to take shortcuts and things. I've read no end to articles that tell me, a game that I've worked on has, you've oversimplified the pirate conflict. You're going to contribute to a bad discourse about this period of history, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't disagree. Like, there are so many millions of things I wish we could say in the games that actually are difficult to get across when you're trying to make a game. But my ultimate joy is that people, when they play an Assassin's Creed game, if you go then and pick up a book about the history of that time period, that's the most joy I can actually take from this, from having made this game. Not, did you like, this one line of dialogue that I happen to have written. I really would love that these games are gateways into deeper learning and curiosity about the world we live in.
Yeah. We had a really good discussion just a couple of weeks ago on this topic with two guests, two Egyptologists, Amit and Dr. Brianna Jackson. Where the topic was teaching through gaming, and you know, yes, the word historical accuracy is oh, I hate that phrase. it's used to beat games up. You know, they are entertainment, but if they open your mind and inspire you to go and learn more, sure, this character might be not quite right, or this texture on this vase might be not quite right for the time period, but did it open your mind? Did it inspire you? That's great.
Yeah, a great example of this that I see, you know, fairly with some frequency on the subreddit is that a lot of people think when they look at England and how we represented the Roman ruins in the Roman past, they find it sort of comically overblown, right? Which is true. Like there were the aqueducts that we have are just massive, right? But the kind of historical accuracy in that sense was not actually the point. The point was to, as you, a player in the 9th century, early Middle Ages, often called the Dark Ages, not because they were not dark morally, but dark because we don't have a historical record. There's just nothing to read. That's why it's called dark. But people have moved away from that phrase. But the idea was to, as a player, as you wander through this landscape, to give you an immediate sensory feeling of like, oh my God, I'm walking on the broken husk of a previous civilization. And we couldn't have achieved that with just a few historically accurate Roman ruins, and that's it, right? We wanted to make you feel as often as possible like you are in a time period that's built upon the ruins of a once massive civilization. And so it's an artistic interpretation, and it's a romantic notion, let's say. But I think it did its job. And I remember seeing a really insightful post called on the subreddit maybe 6 months ago, or maybe even more. Time just passes. But that said basically, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a post-apocalyptic game. And that's totally it. Like we didn't use
that's
those.
Great. I've never heard that before, but that's great.
We didn't use that word specifically, but that was exactly our intention when we were building the historical layers of this game. We were saying, and that's what I spent a lot of time putting the assassin dens together, right? The 6 assassin dens that you can find throughout England. I want you to feel that there was a lot of activity going on, and there was a kind of a height to this civilization, and then the assassins themselves are somewhat complicit in its downfall, or at least its rapidly falling apart, right? And because they assassinated too many people too quickly, and they lost some of the structure and order. Was there a balance they could have achieved? Was there no good answer? Who knows? But the idea was to feel that as you move through this landscape, you feel, oh my God, like hundreds of years ago, there was a different culture here that they knew how to build these gigantic towers. And that's why, like, for instance, like I think it's Stowe who, when you first go to London, says like, oh yeah, built by giants, or maybe it's Eivor that says this place was built by giants. And that's what they believe. They literally, the historical memory of 400 or 500 years is when you don't have written records and YouTube and movies to watch, and from a time gone by, you're just like, who built this? Like, what manner of creature built these crazy things? And so we wanted to give you that feeling in a sensory way, not just in like a line of dialogue, right? And so that's yes, it's historically inaccurate, but the feeling is what we wanted to give you, is what we wanted to transmit.
I'll just say on the aqueduct point, yes, that there weren't, they may have been slightly ahistorical, but I always like the fact that they connected, the ones in England connected what's the right word, poetically with Origins, because in Origins we have that vast aqueduct being constructed. Fast forward 800 and 900 years, and we have these vast aqueducts in ruins, and I think that's nice.
It would have been
a story.
I thought afterwards, like when I saw that, when I read that Reddit post, I thought, oh, it would have been interesting if Origins had been the rise of the Roman Republic in some sense, like if Octavian had been in there, rise of the Roman Empire, sorry. and then go forward to like right smack in the height of the Roman Empire, and then Valhalla would have been like the death of it, right? Like, oh, here's the crumbling ruins of it. That would have been an interesting triptych. I don't think we ever thought about it until after Valhalla was well underway. But that would have been interesting. We could have like planned ahead for kind of some thematic overtones, but you're right. Like at least with Origins and Valhalla, there's a bookend, where the Roman Empire existed in the middle there somewhere.
I mean, the nice thing about Assassin's Creed is as long as the modern day is consistent, you can jump back to the height of the Roman Empire or the birth of the Roman Empire at some point in the future, and a lot of people would love to see it. That.
Indeed.
I want to jump to another question, if I may. So it was reported in, I think it was in the end of year financial results for Ubisoft, that Valhalla had passed $1 billion in revenue, which is a phenomenal sum. And it made me wonder, from your point of view as the member of the writing team, as a member of the creative team, how do you measure your own success? Is it the revenue? Is it player engagement? Is it critics' reviews?
It's funny. My sister-in-law was actually asking that exact question like 2 days ago.
I promise you didn't tell me to ask it. It's fine.
Yeah. For me personally, I'm just somebody who wants to do better than I did last time. Anyone who's dug into any Assassin's Creed games and knows the sort of references I sprinkle throughout there, that I'm a very, very big fan of Orson Welles. And he said one time on Dick Cavett, like late in his career, I think in the 70s sometime, they said, what's the best movie you ever made? And he goes, the one I'm working on right now. And
yeah.
What he meant, obviously, is that as an artist, you just like, there's a story of how he would like introduce a movie, and after he'd edited it, and he'd introduce it, and then he'd walk out the door and never watch it or think about it again. And I kind of have that same feeling where, as somebody with an artistic temperament, I work very, very hard to make something and pour everything I can into it. But as soon as it's in a box, I'm just thinking about the next thing. And so it's very hard for me to. I do get a deep satisfaction that other people are enjoying the game, and it's very, very flattering when people will quote like their favorite lines, and it'll be something that I've written. But it's not the thing that drives me. I've just had my own good, I think, finally honed sense of satisfaction of like, I just want to do better next time. I have ideas that I didn't get to do on the last one that I'd like to do on the next one. I'd like to achieve, different or better or more interesting things. So it just comes from being an endlessly curious person and wanting to just keep going forward. So that's a very hard question. I do appreciate the fans deeply though. And it's very, very humbling to be like, to have people, tell me they love this, but it's also really interesting to hear people say they really didn't like something. And that's also interesting too, and to see where people come from. I always kind of get the sense that, I'm 46, and I've been making these games for a long time, writing in this universe for a long time, and I have a certain taste in, books and storytelling that doesn't always match with the audience that I'm writing for, and I tend to write in a certain way, and I tend to love. Like, hey, okay, the truth is that if someone said, Darby, you can either write a game that sounds like Shakespeare, or you can write it to sound like the next Marvel extended universe movie, I'd be like, Shakespeare all the way. Like, if that means that the audience shrinks because they are like, what's all this Shakespeare? That's fine with me, because it would be, I would try my hardest to make it the most interesting thing you'd ever heard. But it's because I really would want to hear that. I actually wrote.
There's lore there. Queen Elizabeth was restored to the throne with the help of the assassins. Her orb was a apple. So it's the pieces are there.
Well, this is something not a lot of people know, and I don't know if I could ever. Maybe I'll get permission to release it sometime. But I wrote the original casting scripts for Origins in blank verse. and I wrote these. I really had fun writing monologues for Cleopatra and Aya and Bayek in blank verse, and it was a thought at the back of my head, like, could I write the whole game like this, or at least the nobility talks like this. The idea would have been, I guess, to write all Greek speakers in iambic pentameter and all Egyptian speakers in prose, because then you would at least have a stylistic difference of like when the Egyptians were talking Egyptians to each other and when the Greeks were talking the lingua franca of the Roman Empire, Greek. So then at least, okay, yeah, they're all speaking English technically in the game, but you can tell what they're supposed to be. The animus translates it slightly differently into different styles. And so I had this amazing fun writing in blank verse. Maybe I'll ask permission from Ubisoft PR to just like release the casting scripts. They don't appear anywhere in the game because it was really early stuff that I just wrote. We had to cast people before the scripts were even a whisper in someone's ear, but it was super fun. And so anyway, so long story short, I make these games because they're fun artistic challenges as much as I want to entertain other people. And I think the best way that I can do that is by me following what I find interesting, at least, in my little arena. I don't make the games myself. There's a huge team, but when I get me or my writers together, we get excited about writing ideas, and we want to push it as in different directions. And ideally, there's not a lot of stylistic variety in game writing. We're starting to see some. Like, I loved Disco Elysium. It has some of the most unique, chewy writing in all of games. It's so good, and it's a style that I deeply, deeply respect and would love to attempt myself, but it just doesn't fit with Assassin's Creed. It's a kind of a hard-boiled noir kind of speculative craziness. So I'm always looking for those places, like, where can I do something that interests me? Because if I'm interested and passionate, that passion's hopefully going to rub off on a lot of our audience. But maybe also, I'm at an age and I have a style that, other people would find a little bit like, oh, he's a little full of himself, or
Before I try and sneak in with my question, I will say, if there's any Shakespearean style writing in Assassin's Creed, I'm going to be all for it. One of my favorite plays by his is Romeo and Juliet. Macbeth is pretty good, but I think what's the other? Tempest. Tempest is one of the good ones as well. So if there's any hint of Shakespearean writing, I will lap it up. I love Shakespeare. I'm strange. I was probably one of the only kids in my school that when everyone's like, let's read Romeo and Juliet, the whole class of 30 would go, oh, I'm like, yay, I've just read it, I'll read it again.
Yeah, I can tell you, Declan, just for balance, I was the kid who hated Shakespeare and was much happier reading my Cold War spy novels and stuff like that. So let's see.
Yeah.
So the question I asked, and I know I probably on my personal Twitter account probably added you a few many times, and I did get one theory right. What was your favorite Assassin's Creed Valhalla theory on the lead up to the game being released? Because I know one of the tweets I put out is I mentioned Rebecca and Sean was going to be in the game, so I was quite impressed that in July I hinted that Layla was going to meet Rebecca and Sean. Was there any other theories you found before Valhalla released that you really liked?
Any theories?
Yes, because everyone was just speculating like crazy. Twitter was mad.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I'd always... Spoiler. I'd always liked the... people would always kind of go really extreme with this, which is like, oh, is Desmond still alive or not? And I was like, well, yes and no. Like,
what does it mean to be alive?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Are viruses alive? I don't know.
Yeah.
Are digital entities alive? Yeah. So that was a fun one. And I was trying to, at some points, mislead people into get, sometimes fun to poke the hornet's nest just to see what people think. But
I get the impression that you do enjoy a little cryptic response every now and then.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Twitter. I remember, what is it? Charlie Brooker? Is he the guy that writes Black Mirror? Someone asked
Mm,
him, "What's the best
mm.
video game in the last 10 years?" And he said, "Twitter." I think that was him, but I was like, yeah, it's true. It's like, it's the best massively MMO. It's the best MMO ever made.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a good one. And yeah, I don't remember any. Like, it was a long time ago, man.
That's a good point. I mean, we're 18. Hang on, where are we? We're March 20. We're 18 months after. So very quick kind of process question. So game was released to the public November. I would assume that the writing has to be done kind of upfront so that the recording, the animation, everything else can be done. But are the writing teams still actively contributing up to sort of final QA and going gold, or do they start to move on to other projects long before release?
It depends. I mean, I stayed on the project all the way up until release, and so I'm always there to, it depends on, things get done in a specific order, right? Like there's a tremendous amount of audio recording to do for a game like Valhalla, so you really need the scripts done fairly early. Luckily, we had written, I'd say 90% of the game before COVID hit, so that was good. COVID did make figuring out how to record dialogue a little bit difficult, but we ended up, like, for our leads, like Cecily and Magnus, we built recording studios in their houses so they didn't have to leave.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, and because they have the bulk of the dialogue, so we found quick solutions. But yeah, like I think some writers, as soon as they're done with their territories, for instance, they leave. But we always keep a crew of a couple talented people around to always be ready to respond to anything that needs to be changed. But generally we're finished. Games are typically done. I'd say 4 to 8 weeks before they actually get released. Yeah. Obviously, with patching, you can keep working on patches and updating stuff, and but in order for the whole manufacturing process, right? You gotta get the game to people, and they gotta stamp the disc and put it in a little box and get it on the shelf. So games have to be done a certain amount of time. So I think generally you can be sure, like, if your favorite game is, like, I'm playing Elden Ring right now, I'm sure Elden Ring was done in January, right? January 1st. They were just testing it and doing that patch, right? Or even December probably. And of course we have an extended experience where we're constantly updating the game with new stuff. So there's still writers on the team, doing their thing. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, games of this size, there's a lot of overlapping schedules. I'm sure I've said something in here where where the PR team's gonna be like, snip that part, and don't show our secret sauce of how we work, but we'll see.
I think anyone with a brain would probably guess that the writing and audio recording has to be done fairly early, or in parallel with AI and programming and asset generation and all the rest of it. But
there's, especially with the dual protagonist thing, like you add even more on top of that. There's just only a certain amount. You have to actually rent recording studios, and you can't have 2 people on the same mic at the same time, so you need separate rooms, right? So that's just logistics that you work out ahead of time, and we have a super experienced team. So if you say, hey, we have X number of lines in this game, the audio team goes, okay, that's going to mean we need X number of weeks to record this game. And we do have a very experienced team here, so we came up with a schedule 2 years out. We're like, okay, if this game's going to have this many scenes and this many lines, we can estimate this many things. And actually they give us a budget. They say, please try not to go over this many lines, so we kind of allocate, like, okay, each territory, each shire, let's say, let's not go over this number of lines, because then you're going to be stealing from another territory, etc. It's all very boring.
To be honest, I'm a bit of a nerd. I find the project management side rather interesting, and that must be I guess you learn through experience. It's the writing isn't just purely creative. You do have to balance off what is engaging gameplay. How much time do we have on screen, in the volume, in the audio booth? How many people can we have on screen at once and animate them? So there must be a lot of different constraints to balance.
Exactly.
I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, constraints are actually fantastic because you really need to know the size of the house you live in before you start buying the paint to paint it and the furniture to outfit it, right? If it's like, oh, I'm going to buy a house, it could be 1,000 square feet, it could be 5,000 square feet. Who knows? And you're like, no, give me some measurements so I know how to fill it. So yeah.
I wonder if I might ask. I know we are probably approaching our time now, so let us know if you need
one more question. Let's say one more question. Yeah.
Sure. Declan, do you want to ask the final question and then we'll wrap up?
Yes, I do have an interesting one. And now I do want to say that this is purely theory-based. I know you write the narratives and there's all that NDA stuff, but do you actually have any AC theories that you would not explore in the games? Just any random theories?
Oh wow. I don't know. No, I mean, no. I think I'm going to disappoint you with that question. I don't have, because I think mainly because I think I'm always looking for fresh ground, right? So like, I want the next time period that I work on to be like really fresh, and so surprising. And I feel like, from a fan point of view, a lot of fans are like, oh, I want these things wrapped up. I want to see where this goes, which is very important. And we tried to do a lot of that in Valhalla, but we didn't set out to do that. It was more that as we delved into the time period of Valhalla, I always just made notes of, oh, you know what? I think I could dive back into this here. I think I could get the Adam and Eve thing and and I think I could do that. But it's like I discover those things as I'm painting, prepping the canvas, as it were. So for me, I think, any new time periods that I work on, those things will probably make themselves known to me. But I really start from a point of view of freshness. Like, how do I make this next story the freshest thing possible, so that people, like people didn't see pirates coming, and yet we made a really fantastic pirate game that fit really well into the AC universe. And I like doing that sort of. I like giving people what they didn't even know they wanted. But in retrospect, it's like, of course, Assassin's Creed can be bigger than just that thing that we thought. Because I think fans, their usual frame of reference is the last game they loved, right? Like, oh, more of that, please. Give me more of that. Give me more of that feeling. And it's the same. I'm the same way with a band I like. Like, oh, I love Radiohead. I loved Kid A and In Rainbows and OK Computer. Let's listen to this Moon-Shaped Pool. Whoa, it's nothing like their past stuff, but it retains that spirit that makes Radiohead so good. So I love it. And that's a very intangible thing to achieve, right? You're not always so lucky. Not every band is Radiohead.
I think what I'm hearing is it sounds like Jazz Age Junkies is coming.
You got me. No.
Can't wait.
Where would it be set? Should it be in New Orleans or should it be in Chicago?
New Orleans, references to Abilene.
Or should it be just an adaptation of The Great Gatsby? Maybe it's just Assassin's Gatsby. Who knows?
Assassin's Gatsby. I'm sold. Literally, I'm sold.
The three cities. Here it is. The three cities are Manhattan, Chicago, and New Orleans. There we go. Jazz Age.
All right.
I would say Chicago would work really
I'm just going to say one thing, right? We've made this joke already, but when Clemence Nogrieks was interviewed on the Sisterhood Speaks podcast a few weeks ago, she did say that the many fan arts of Eivor and Cassandra helped to kind of inspire the crossover writers and the crossover dev team. So send your Jazz Age Junkies fan arts to Twitter and let's make it happen.
Yeah. I'm just really want to see what the costumes are like, because that's going to be good.
God. Yes.
Yeah. Maybe there's a hidden blade in someone's trumpet.
It'd be a modern version of Aveline's blowpipe. It'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I think it's funny because I'm just one of these assassin fans, and it's hard to explain because people don't understand it, but I just will play anything Assassin's Creed because the stories are always so fun. So if someone says, hey, this is in the Jazz Age and you get this trumpet that's secretly a poison blow dart, I wouldn't care.
Well,
But cool.
I will
do that.
I will say that I think after working on this series for a long time, I think one of the secrets in the, let's say, Assassin's Creed DNA, if you will, is that it's a franchise that, much like a lot of the best franchises, allows the audience to participate in the creation of future content, even if it's only in your mind, right? So this idea that it's a series that by Assassin's Creed 2, suddenly the fans are like, oh my gosh, this could go anywhere. And we could meet any historical character. And the costumes could look, it could be evocative of that time period. So now you don't even need Ubisoft to give you the new games. There were fan arts of Viking assassins years ago before Valhalla, and fan arts of what would dynastic China look like, and what would all these, and the Mongolians and all this, like, and it's so I think that's one of the strengths of it, is, and that's why it captures people, is you as a fan get to participate in it and speculate far into the future. It's something that kind of GTA like had always. You're like, oh, where's the next city going to be? And it just, that's part of the fun of speculating. And you have to wait many years for new GTA games. Yes. I have no idea where the next one would go. What if they pull a fast one and go back to New York for a third time? Like, who knows? But we'll see.
I will admit, if I knew how to draw, all Ubisoft would be spanned is fan art of Isu riding dinosaurs, because it's still in my head that Isu's lived longer than the Sith did.
I think you could do saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths, but I don't think
armored
dinosaurs.
Mammoths.
I don't think, because the meteor that hit the dinosaurs does not coincide with the Toba catastrophe.
But you saw
a little bit earlier.
Tigers.
Saber-toothed tigers, though, that works. I think the last smilodon was probably 30,000 years ago.
Right.
Maybe 40.
I am now imagining a He-Man Isu sitting on top of a saber-toothed tiger. That's it. It's canon in my head. There is an Isu out there that rides a pet saber-toothed tiger. It's canon in my head, and it's staying.
Man, if this were a visual podcast, that would be a final good parting image. The three of us riding off in Isu gear on a smilodon. Let's do that.
Okay.
Someone in the fan base.
Oh my God!
Do that, please. I want to see that. I want to see that
There
image.
we go.
With me and Declan and James on 3 smilodons with Isu, with swords of Eden. How about that?
Do it.
I want to see this so bad. This would be perfect. Oh,
but I have one request. I do need to be in Arno's robes. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hey.
All right. Declan, I think we need to wrap up the show.
So, great pleasure having you aboard, Darby. I hope you've enjoyed yourself.
Definitely. It's always fun to just, spin yarns with AC fans.
It's been great.
Yeah.
And so if anybody is going to do us all a solid and draw 3 of us on Smilodons and Isu gear, you can at Darby, or you can at us at AC Let's Talk, or James at James to Liquid. I really need to get this image out of my head. I'm not just stuck in my mind. You can also email us about your any topic requests, or if you've enjoyed the show, at assassinscreed@gmail.com. And we'll see you all next week.
See you all soon.
Take care, everyone.